All right, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Brandon Fleener. I'm a recent graduate of Northeast State Community College. I received my Associates of Arts in History. And when I was contacted and told that, they were doing this project to kind of collect the history of the state, I volunteered because it sounded really cool. And Professor Cox told me that I get to interview you today about the Negro Baseball Leagues, which is a subject that I myself have no idea about. So I'm really excited to kind of jump into this with you and learn about a lot about it, myself, and collect this for the school. So if you would go ahead and introduce yourself, Andrea, I'm really happy to be able to talk to you today.
I'm so happy to be here. So I am Andrea Williams. I am an author and journalist in based in Nashville, Tennessee, originally from Kansas City, Missouri, which is actually where the first Negro League was founded, the Negro National League in 1920. But I've been in Nashville here in Middle Tennessee for about 12 years now. Recently published a book on the Negro Leagues, and it came out January 5th of 2021. It is called Baseball's Leading Lady, Effa Manley and the Rise and Fall of the Negro Leagues. It is a biography of Effa, who is, her husband owned a baseball team. She is also the first and only woman inducted into Cooperstown, but it really is kind of a sweeping overview of the history of Black baseball. So starting before there were official leagues and then ending right around the time when Effa and her husband left professional baseball, which was post Jackie Robinson's integration with the Dodgers, post Jackie and Larry Doby, Monty Irvin as well. But really this was around the time that the Negro Leagues really kind of started to fall apart. So but I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So for those of us that are unfamiliar with the Negro League baseball, can you take a moment and explain what the Negro Leagues were and why they existed?
Sure. So the Negro Leagues were what it sounds like. They were leagues, teams and leagues that were segregated, that were run, that comprised of Black players. And that could include like Black Americans as well as some Black Latinos. But they were separate from what was happening in Major League Baseball because Major League Baseball didn't allow Black players. There was a so-called gentleman's agreement that was put in place in the late 1880s that basically forbade any additional Black players from being signed to white professional baseball teams. So prior to this moment, baseball in this country is kind of in its infancy in the sense that there are lots of people playing. It's this hot new game. During the Civil War, you see, guys kind of coming together and having these like kind of informal contests as a way to like shoot the breeze and, take their minds off of battle and all this. And it starts to pick up steam. Now we've got civilians interested in playing. It is the hot new thing in America. And as we fast forward, we start to see that there are people who are like, we can actually make some money on this, right? Like we can host these contests and then we can sell tickets for them and make money, and I can have this whole structure and put together this team that sticks together, and then we can go out on the road and play other teams. And it is starting to become an enterprise. It's nothing like what we see today, in terms of professional sports being this multi-billion-dollar industry, but it is starting to get there. And we see some early formation of leagues and things like that. And in those early days, there were Black players on some of those teams, not a lot, but, we haven't quite gotten to the point where these managers of white teams are saying, absolutely not, we're not going to sign you because you're Black. At this point, it is mostly, are you good enough to hang? Can we win baseball games with you? And of course, yes, Black people are good. White people are good, Black people are good. But yeah, there were, again, as we approach the end of that century, there were some instances where some white players, particularly Cap Anson, feels some kind of way about playing against a team that has a Black player on it. So, initially he kind of, makes this statement. He is to face off against Moses Fleetwood Walker, who is the first Black player to play on a professional team on and this distinction gets kind of weird for some people because, we have professional, we have semi-pro, we have amateur, we have all these different designations, and Black people were through all levels of baseball. But in terms of the professional leagues, what is the direct precursor for Major League Baseball that we have now? Moses Fleetwood Walker is the first. He's on a team that is playing against Cap Anson. Cap Anson's like, I don't know how I feel about this. But at this point, if you don't play the game, this is pre-TV deals. There's no merch revenue. If you don't play the game, you don't get paid. And ultimately, that was the decision Cap had to face. And so he decides to play this game. But fast forward a few years after that, he is really at this point one of the marquee players in the league. So his name carries a lot of weight. And this time when he says, yo, I'm not playing on a team or playing against a team that has a Black player on it, everybody starts to listen. Do other white players feel like this? Would it be easier if we just kind of kept Black people out of this altogether? At this point, Reconstruction post-Civil War has completely fallen apart. Whatever intent there was to kind of bridge the divide between white and Black has essentially crumbled. At this point, there's more of a concern about bringing North and South back together, white North and South back together, more than it is about, well, how do we make sure that Black people who were enslaved just a couple decades ago are fully integrated into society. And so the easier thing to do, quite frankly, is to kind of capitulate to this idea of whiteness. And Moses wasn't completely kicked off of his team. Again, the idea was that we're not going to sign any more Black players. And that held without a formal written statute until 1945, when Jackie is signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers. So in the interim, though, Black people are still playing baseball. Okay. So initially it is on these independent teams, which there were a lot of white independent teams too, but they would form, and you'd have some savvy guy who had enough money to kind of fund things on his own, and then they would travel around. You'd get some kind of transportation where you could travel around the country and play other teams, essentially pull up wherever there was a team and people who would pay to come and see you, living and dying by the weather report, by, how many, hopefully the team doesn't get sick, all these kinds of things. But they did that, Black players, Black teams did that for quite a while. And Rube Foster, who was a great player in his own right, was really one of the best pitchers of his era, white or Black. The rumor is that he got his nickname, his name's Andrew Foster. The rumor is that he got his nickname Rube by beating Rube Waddell, who was, a great white pitcher of his era. Supposedly he beat him in an exhibition game, and that's how he got his nickname. But Rube understood. Rube started out as a player, became a manager, was involved when he was in Chicago, and was involved with, not just, booking games, but also playing players, wanted to make sure that players were compensated fairly, all the same issues that we see now, right? Like players making sure that, I am the driving revenue force for this team. Am I getting my fair share of this? The executive, that battle between executive and player, has always been around for as long as sports have been around. And Rube, again, having been on both sides of it, was acutely aware of, making sure that players were compensated fairly, that players had a set salary in place, that they weren't just living and dying by gate receipts, and that, it wasn't just an operation so that the team owner could run off with the money and then, diss the players who were, again, really the driving force of the team. But above all of that, he understood that if Black baseball was really, again, we're talking about baseball growing as this enterprise, professional sports, becoming more and more lucrative as a business operation in this country. Rube is looking at what is happening in white baseball with, you know, the American and National League and Major League Baseball. And he's like, we got to do that, right? Like baseball on the whole is becoming more popular. They are making more money. If we want to do that in Black baseball, we've got to, let's emulate that model. Of course, it was not an apples to apples comparison because these are Black teams led by Black men who on the whole didn't have access to the capital that white men had. They didn't have access to stadiums. You know, this was an issue that plagued Black baseball from the very beginning for the reasons that you would expect, right? Stadiums are essentially pieces of property on pieces of land, and Black people didn't have access to that really in terms of owning it on their own. So there was always this push to figure out how can we even find the space to play. So 99 times out of 100, they are renting from white stadium owners, which cuts into profits and makes it harder to sign players, to pay them fairly. So we've got players jumping around from team to team. A host of issues are plaguing Black baseball that aren't necessarily plaguing white baseball, even though white baseball, of course, has its own issues too, right? We've got the Black Sox scandal. These dudes are in the World Series cheating, okay? Everybody got issues. The Black ones are just a little different, and I think on the whole are harder to overcome. Nonetheless, Rube is, you know, really determined to make sure that there is some kind of organized structure within Black baseball so that everybody can be more successful on the whole. So he creates the first Negro League in 1920 in Kansas City, Missouri at the Paseo YMCA, the Negro National League, which was comprised mainly of Midwestern teams. A few years later, the Eastern Colored League is formed on the East Coast of mainly Eastern teams. And it really kind of kickstarts this effort to organize Black baseball. So there were still independent barnstorming teams throughout this entire history, but now again, we're more closely mirroring that formal structure that white baseball has. We've got 2 opposing leagues. That means we can have a World Series. We, you know, have teams that we can kind of have a set schedule. So everybody's playing the same teams the same amount of time. So now at the end of the season, we can tally up wins and losses and see who really is the best. You know, that was, you know, there was this thing, you know, pre-Negro National League where it was like, who's the best team? And you had the Chicago American Giants, Rube's team, that was really great. And then in Indianapolis, you have the ABCs, and they were really great too. And so there was this constant battle amongst the 2 teams, you know, this rivalry about, you know, well, who's better? How do we really know? We're not playing the same competition. You know, we don't have the same kind of schedule, but forming these formal leagues and having, again, this more centralized league and then one on the East Coast allows all of that to kind of fall into place in the sense that we can now look at this as a structure that that is organized, that is being run properly. And I think for Rube, the goal also, in addition to making money, to providing jobs for players, for managers, for executives, all these things, was also to gain the respect of the white baseball community. I don't think at any point, you know, he thought that, okay, we're going to create these Black leagues and this is what we will do forever and ever and ever and ever. It was, okay, if we do this and we can show not just that we are great on the field, that we can, you know, hit far and throw hard and run fast, but also that we can really run teams, well, they will respect us more. And then maybe we can talk about integration, because really we should be playing with them at the same time. And you know, a lot of these guys had played with and against white players. Again, Rube, you know, in this exhibition game against Rube Waddell. So this was not a stretch. So I think that was a large part too of the intent behind creating these formal leagues. But, you know, again, we didn't see that, right? We didn't see integration until 1945 when Jackie resigned. He played 46 in the minors and then 47 with the big league Dodgers. But those were individual players who were brought in. Those were not whole teams or leagues. So this era of segregation that, you know, was really ugly when you think about it, this idea that, you know, people, because of the color of their skin, are not allowed to participate. It also gives birth to this really beautiful thing in the sense that now not just Black players, but managers, owners, executives, bus drivers, secretaries, all these people have work and can come together and build this thing free of the strictures that they would find in the larger outside white world. There were challenges. Again, I cannot stress that enough. Stadium rentals, they're dealing with white booking agents. A lot of times when they're renting stadium space from these white stadium owners, there's a white guy in between there who's taking a cut just for facilitating the rental relationship. So there's still, this is, Rube starts the Negro National League in 1920 and runs it through, he ends up getting sick and passes away. That league finally pretty much falls apart with the Great Depression. But during that decade, this is fresh off the red summer of 1919, when, Black people are literally being dragged from their homes and beaten. There's a particular attack against Black veterans who fought in World War I, this idea that Black men would come and be fully uniformed and armed. This inherent intimidation factor that comes with that, and the need for white people to cut them off at the knees. This is still the society that they are in, but with these leagues, they are able to create something like an oasis in the middle of that. And these men are able to get paid, not always a lot, certainly not as much as their white counterparts. They're able to be paid to do something that they love, which is playing baseball.
Was there ever any discussion or kind of desire to play against kind of like a World Series that included the National League, American League, and these Negro Leagues? Was that ever something that, I know that, like you said with Cap, where he didn't want that, but was there anything like, having these teams from the Negro Leagues playing against to say, maybe we're better than the white teams?
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of exhibition games played, primarily because, again, in this era where baseball is just starting to make money, but not making the money that we know now, like most players, had jobs in the off season, right? And so a lot of teams too would play exhibition games. Teams, white teams would go to Latin America in the winter and pick up extra games and play in winter leagues to make more money and things like that. But Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was brought in as the commissioner of Major League Baseball post Black Sox scandal to kind of clean things up, he really liked the idea of white teams playing against Black teams, primarily because he understood that if white teams are playing against Black teams, they might lose. And so then what does that mean? What does that mean for this idea that they are not allowed in because they are not as good as us? They are not on the same level as us. We can't even put that out into the atmosphere that, that they can hang or that they would actually be competition. But again, these things still happen, right? There were still lots of exhibition games, but in terms of a formal, mandated, league approved, that just inherently goes against the idea of segregation and the myth of white supremacy and what it is founded on. If you believe that you are inherently greater, better, just because of the color of your skin, you're not even going to be in competition with them. Why?
So Tennessee played a role in the history of the Negro League Baseball. For example, Thomas Wilson established an extremely successful minor league team, the Nashville Elite Giants. They claimed 4 championships in the NSL, or the Negro Southern League, between 1920 and 1936. Can you talk about Thomas Wilson and his team?
Yeah. So Nashville, like, any other major city in the country, particularly with, a large Black population, there were Black teams. Again, baseball is the thing that everybody does. Now if you drive around, I tell my kids, now if you drive through any random neighborhood, you're going to see kids, on a basketball court playing basketball. So during this era, baseball is the national pastime and everybody plays baseball. And you've got companies that are funding their own semi-pro teams and having them play games against other companies, businesses getting involved in this in a way that you don't really see now, but just at that time, baseball was the thing. And so yeah, it's only natural that Nashville that had this large, strong Black population, again, because of, there we have multiple HBCUs here. Tennessee was a slaveholding state, so you have, a Black population that even post-emancipation is here. Okay, so there were teams that were founded around that, and Tom Wilson pretty early sees that there is money to be made in baseball, right? Ultimately, this is what we keep coming back to, baseball as business. And yeah, he got into, first promoting games, kind of putting up the money so that teams could come in and play contests, and then he would take the proceeds or a portion of the proceeds after paying the players, and eventually decides to start his own team. The Nashville Elite Giants were a part of the Negro Southern League. And eventually, once he, as we move along and he starts to see that, maybe there's more money to be made in other markets, the East Coast was always, kind of the hub of baseball. New York has multiple professional teams. He starts bouncing the team around a little bit, and they end up landing more permanently in Baltimore. They become the Baltimore Elite Giants. But Tom was always here. He always had a home here in Nashville, even as his team moved around. He was a really big part of the Nashville community. He founded or built his own baseball stadium, his own park in 1929, Wilson Park, which was relatively unheard of at the time. There were some other black baseball team owners that had their own stadium. Gus Greenlee had his own stadium in Pittsburgh, but it was a really rare occurrence. But it just showed, the power that Tom Wilson had, also the money that he had at his disposal. But what that meant was that now he is not chopping up his proceeds to a stadium owner, to a booking agent. He can house his own games at his stadium and keep all of that money. He was also able to rent the stadium to white teams that will come in and play minor league teams. They were doing spring training or things like that. But I think probably the most significant, contribution from Tom Wilson is that he later became the president of the Negro National League. And I say significant more by title in terms of like what he actually did. He was a bit of I don't want to say polarizing character, but he was president of the league during this really interesting time as integration becomes imminent. Black baseball is trying to figure out how to make this new thing work for them, right? The public facing response is that yes, integration is great and black players deserve to play with white players in the Major League Baseball. Behind the scenes, it's more of, okay, well, if the black players go play for the white teams, what are we going to do? What will happen to our businesses? And Tom Wilson, for all intents and purposes, at least by title, was the leader of the National League during this critically important era of not just Black baseball history, but baseball history in general. But he was a bit hesitant to really, kind of take a forceful hand on some of these matters. Black baseball, again, not perfect. White baseball, not perfect. Black baseball, not perfect. There were issues with leadership. For a long time, Effa Manley was pushing for neutral leadership, a neutral commissioner. What Kennesaw Mountain Landis was to Major League Baseball, she felt like Black baseball needed as well. Again, this thing of, okay, if this model is working for the white guys and it is successful, we should probably implement that as well. Instead, you always had, these league presidents who also had teams. And so were, obviously biased and impacted in their decision-making because of their own personal motives with their personal teams. So it was a really sticky situation. There were things, that will come up in terms of how to handle players who jumped teams, to go get more money over here, jumped out of contracts and things like that, which ultimately Effa felt like, again, kind of thinking back and mirroring Rube's thought process, if integration is going to happen, how can we best position ourselves to to take advantage of that, at least to not be left behind. Certainly we need to put on as good a face as possible, right? We need to be, this is all about respectability. This is all about showing them, again, same thing that we're talking about in the 20s, that we are not just great athletes, that we can also run teams really well.
So it sounds like that was a major concern for a lot of the executives and team owners, was that, if baseball did integrate, they would kind of be left behind as executives and league owners, that all the players would go play in the National League and American League, and they would just be, left without players, or is that what their concern was?
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, it started initially, Branch Rickey integrating baseball. This is the guy who, in St. Louis had basically built a dynasty by creating the modern farm system that we know now, which stipulates essentially that you go and find really, really young guys and you sign them as cheaply as possible because they are young, because they are underdeveloped or undeveloped. You build them in-house, you develop them in-house, and then, once they are there, either you call them up to your big club or you can sell them on the open market as a free agent and then make this crazy return on investment, because really you paid hardly anything for them. This is how Branch Rickey operates as an executive. So when he goes to the Dodgers, and at this point he's in his 60s, in the early 40s, he still has he's still taking the same approach to building a team. We're also in World War II right now. So a lot of Major League Baseball team rosters were decimated because baseball players were fighting overseas. So Branch Rickey is trying to figure out how to build this team, how to get it to the same level that the Cardinals were at when he was there, and also how to do it as cheaply as possible. And there's nothing cheaper than free. So he is able to, kind of kill two birds with one stone, in the sense that he can rebuild the Dodgers, very little money. He's signing, this talent that, Jackie Robinson coming out of UCLA. Baseball is his worst sport. He spends only 9 months, one season in the Negro Leagues. But obviously Jackie, who would go on to become this incredible Major League Baseball player, Branch can see that, there's some stuff there for sure. Like, we can take this guy and he can do great things for us. At least we hope so. Best case scenario, right? So he is able to go and get this talent that will absolutely turn the Dodgers into this perennial contender. Don't have to spend very little money, because the general consensus in society right now is that we got to do something about this Negro problem, right? All the Black people are upset. We're pushing for integration. This is pre Brown versus Board of Education. This is pre Montgomery bus boycott. But sports is where we see, even in society now, this is kind of where we see a lot of times these issues come to the fore more quickly than they do in larger society. So yeah, post World War II, Black people are like, yo, we just went overseas and fought. Why can't we even play baseball with y'all? What is happening here? And Branch is able to take advantage of that. He's able to step in and kind of, present, I don't want to say present himself as a savior, but certainly as though he's doing this benevolent thing for the Black community, even though when we're talking specifically about these Black businesses, these Black teams, he is absolutely hurting them. But again, because of what is happening in society, nobody can really say that, at least not publicly. They can't really push back against that, because then they would look as though they're impeding this progress that Black people have been fighting for so long. So yeah, initially for these owners, it is, you can't steal our players. We developed them. Tom Wilson, went on record pretty early, and this was before Branch Rickey signed Roy Campanella, who was his player. But, just kind of made this, blanket statement like, yeah, I do think that, if white team owners want to recruit Black players and they recruit them from Black teams, that, since we invested the money to develop them, we should be compensated. But that never happened. So yeah, I think initially the concern was just, okay, we're going to fall apart really quickly. I think I think the assumption on both the Black side and the white side, just in terms of the lay audience, the general public, was that this thing's going to happen really fast. Jackie's been signed and the floodgates are going to open and this thing is going to blow wide in like 2 to 3 years. It did not happen like that. But for the Black team owners, they saw this thing falling apart really quickly. Once we got past Jackie, and then we also see, okay, Don Newcomb, he is signed without any compensation to the Dodgers, and Roy Campanella is signed without any compensation to the Baltimore Eli Giants. Okay, if this thing keeps happening, we're not going to have businesses by this time next year. Again, wasn't quite that fast, but that was the initial concern. As we move forward, particularly, an executive like Effa's like, wait a minute now. Our whole leagues, everything we've built is going to fall apart. How will we, as business owners, as executives, as our employees, how will we fit into this new structure if Major League Baseball is only calling for the players? What will happen then? What will happen to the players who don't get the call? When Major League Baseball comes calling, they don't want the guy, I always say they don't want the guy who's at the bottom of the pitching rotation, even in the middle of the pitching rotation. It takes until 1959 for every team to have at least one Black player. Trust, they were getting guys who they thought could contribute immediately. They are not getting guys to develop them. Jackie Robinson was put on a minor league team first, and Branch Rickey signed a couple other guys too who he put in the minor league system. Don started out in the minor league, so did Roy Campanella. Johnny Wright, another pitcher who was signed and put on the minor league. He was in Montreal with Jackie. He didn't make it. Okay. But once we get to Bill Veeck and the Cleveland Baseball Club signing Larry Doby got signed and within a few days was playing for the Indians. So we have to think about, this idea also that there are players who are not going to be able to make the jump. So aside from talking about managers and executives who certainly don't get the call, there are players who don't get the call either. Now, and I know I'm fast forwarding, but once Black baseball falls apart, now they don't have jobs either. Now they're going back to factories because they are not quite there. White teams are not interested in them. They may be past their prime. They may be in their late 30s. There were some tryouts that happened even before Jackie Robinson was signed. And the general consensus was like, okay, these guys are too old. Okay. We're integrating, we're signing Black players. We're doing something that we've never done before. We don't necessarily want to do it with a guy who's 39. So there were a lot of people who missed out, not just because of integration and not just because they couldn't play with the white guys, but also because integration catalyzed the dismantling of Black baseball. And so now we can't play with the white guys or the Black guys either because now there are no Black teams to play for.
We certainly can't talk to you without asking you about Effa Manley, who you mentioned earlier. Who was Effa Manley and what were some of her major contributions to Negro League Baseball?
Effa Manley was co-owner of the Newark Eagles of the Negro National League, the second Negro National League, co-owned the team with her husband, Abe. And Effa was essentially what we know today as like general manager. I think the term at the time was business manager, but she handled all player contracts and negotiations. She did all the scheduling for games. She handled PR and media relations. Like she was really like a one-woman shop. And a lot of this, again, too, Black teams were most often operating on a shoestring. So their front offices were really, really lean. Effa was not the first woman to own a baseball team. She wasn't the first Black woman. She wasn't the first white. I mean, there were white women as well. But particularly in Major League Baseball, when white women would inherit teams from fathers or husbands, they would then hire a president or a general manager or someone who would come in and actually handle the day-to-day operations of the club. Effa owned this team with her husband while he was alive and ran the team. So Abe was the guy's guy that's hopping on the bus to go on the road trips. He did a lot of scouting trips. He would go down south and recruit players and do things like that. He pretty much left all of the office operations to Effa. And she, didn't have any background in baseball. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve, but she figured it out pretty quickly, just out of necessity, and was able to do really well. I mean, she put together some really great teams. Her team won the 1946 Negro World Series. But I think also as important as what she did on the baseball field was what she did off of it, or rather how she used what was happening on the field to impact what was happening off of it. So Effa didn't have baseball business experience, but she 100% had experience in advocating for the Black community. So before she ever gets into baseball, she leads a boycott of a Harlem department store, because despite the fact that this store is in Harlem, in this Black enclave, and they're generating 70-75% of their sales receipts from the Black community, they did not hire Black people in the best paying and most visible positions like sales clerks. And there was this back and forth. Initially, Effa had this group of women who wanted to fight on behalf of the other women who couldn't get these jobs, and they didn't really make a lot of traction on their own. She brought in a local pastor, and so he, took a meeting with the owner of the store, and again is trying to do this the nice and polite way. And he brings in the proof of the sales receipts, and nothing happens. And so, we get to the point where we have to picket. We're boycotting. This is the Harlem version of the "Don't Buy Where You Can't Work" campaign that is, rippling throughout the country at this time. This is mid-30s. And ultimately there is a sit-down meeting with the owner of the store, and Effa is there along with this pastor and a Black attorney, and Effa flat out says, if you don't hire these women, they don't have many options. What, will they become prostitutes? And it is this kind of jaw-dropping scene, particularly when we consider the era, the time that this is happening in. Women on the whole are generally expected to be seen and not heard. And Effa's here, and she is speaking loudly, and she is saying things that are probably generally not acceptable for a woman to say. She does not care, because at the end of the day, she is more concerned about the lives, the well-being, the livelihoods of these women who she is representing once she gets inside of this room with this owner of this department store. F carries all of that into her baseball career. So, I need to win games. That was very competitive. I want to win ball games. I'm serious about that for sure. But also, what are we doing to benefit the local community that is supporting this team? So she's in Newark. She is hosting anti-lynching campaigns. She's raising money for the local chapter of the NAACP. She is constantly trying to figure out how to use her team to support Black people on the whole, which again, if we move forward and talk about integration and what is happening with, essentially the collapse of this great institution, this multi-million-dollar institution, I absolutely think Effa was, felt some kind of way about losing her business. But I also know that she was concerned about what it meant to the community. What does it mean now that Black kids, she had a program where Black kids in Newark could come and go to the games for free and see their favorite players for free. Are the white teams going to do that? Are Black teams, are Black players going to have this safe space? We can talk about Jackie going in, and we all have heard the stories about the torture he had to endure, the racism, the epithets, all these kinds of things that Branch Rickey told him, I need somebody strong enough to withstand this, to turn the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. Again, there were flaws in Black baseball, but they didn't have to deal with that, right? It was still a community thing that was completely lost. And I think that worried Effa, that concerned Effa more than anything else. But Effa, you know, she fought till the end. Her and Abe got out of baseball in 48 once their profits really fell off of a cliff, because, you know, black people on the whole made the shift with Jackie to the majors. So once Jackie's gone, Black fans on the whole want to go see Jackie. They don't really want to go see the Black teams anymore. The Black press that had covered Black baseball so extensively, really what we know about the Negro Leagues is because of papers like the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender that covered these games, these teams, these players when white reporters and papers weren't interested. They made the jump too. So there really was nowhere to go. Again, teams lived and died by gate receipts. So if you're not getting the people to come through the turnstile, you're not making any money. You can't last very long. And again, because Black teams mostly operated on a shoestring, they didn't have this reserve of cash to get them through, you know, the first year or two post Jackie, and we'll take the hit and regroup and figure out what we're going to do then. Those profits fell off really quickly, and the best thing to do was get out. But at the same time, she was still fighting. So right after Jackie, she gets a call from Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck says, I'm interested in Larry Doby, but he's also doing something that Branch Rickey never did, which was make a call to the team and actually try to conduct business. So Effa's like, all right, well, what will you give me for him? So they ultimately end up deciding on a fee that really constitutes the first time that a team is paid real money for a player. Now, it is nothing close to what Larry Doby should have actually gotten, but it is money. And then after she gets out of baseball, there's an incident with Monty Irvin, who was signed to her club, who once her and Abe sold the team to a couple guys out of Memphis who were planning to move the team to Houston. Monty Irvin, you know, heard that maybe the team was no longer in existence. So here comes Branch Rickey. And Monty Irvin decides to sign with Branch, and immediately Effa's like, okay, this is the last straw. We're not doing this anymore. You know, these Memphis businessmen had bought the Eagles with roster, everything intact, just like what you would see now. You have new ownership of a team. They get everything that comes with the team, including all the players. So Effa understood that, sent an attorney to reach out to Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey says, you know what, if Monty Irvin is indeed still under contract, we will release him. Now everybody's mad at Effa because it looks like she has gotten in the way of Monty Irvin's big league debut. But she kind of has one more ace up her sleeve and decides to put in some calls and ultimately gets him with the New York Giants, and they pay $5,000 for his contract. And that is what really kind of sets this precedent, in the sense that, you know, now when major league teams are coming for Black players, they have to pay something. Nobody is ever, again, paying full price what these players are worth, but at least they're getting something. It's more than what they ever got from Branch Rickey. And Effa was largely responsible for that.
So fans of baseball history know Branch Rickey as the general manager of the Dodgers, who in 1945 broke the color barrier, signing Jackie Robinson, like you talked about earlier. In your book, you describe Effa and many Negro League team owners as naive regarding integration. Why were they naive, and what was Manley's relationship like with Branch Rickey?
What was the last part of the question?
What was Effa Manley's relationship like with Branch Rickey?
Okay. I think the general naivety is really just, again, what I stated about, you know, the assumption that integration is going to happen fully and quickly. And again, it didn't. It takes till 59 for every team to have one player. Even after that, there's this quota system that, you know, stipulates that, you know, there can be no more than a handful of Black players on any team. We don't want these teams to get too Black. Effa and Branch, you know, we don't have a lot of information in terms of their relationship. We do know that they knew each other. Of course, they operated in the same market initially. When Effa and Abe first go into baseball, they are based in Brooklyn. And also, again, a lot of these Black teams, you know, Effa and Abe had a relationship with the owner of Rupert Stadium in Newark. So they played most of their home games there. But in the Northeast, particularly where all these teams are, Black teams are playing in these different white stadiums, they all knew each other. There was a moment right before Jackie's contract is announced. Jackie's signing is announced in October of 45, where, someone from the Dodgers organization reaches out to Effa about putting together this exhibition game. Effa is excited because she thinks that this is an opportunity for her to show how great Black baseball is, how great these players are, how great we can be as a team. I'm going to put Black players on the field with a Black manager so you can see how great my manager is. Like all of these things, at this point, there were enough whispers to know. Again, there were some other tryouts already. People know that integration is happening. Jackie has already met with Branch Rickey in August. Everybody doesn't know that yet. So here we are in September, and she's putting together this team with the idea that we're gonna show them, we're gonna show white baseball, and then they will have to negotiate fairly with us. Then we can talk about bringing in, entire leagues like the Negro League. The Negro National League can be like a minor league, affiliate of Major League Baseball. We will sign and develop the talent. Then you guys can call them up when you're ready, and then you will pay us just the same way you do for all of the other minor league operations that you do business with. The Dodgers, on the other hand, Branch Rickey, are using this exhibition as an opportunity to recruit. So he already knows he wants Jackie, but he has an opportunity to see all of these other players who he would sign to. He has an opportunity to see, Roy Campanella up close and Johnny Wright up close. And so I think that was probably the most glaring example of Effa's naivety, in the sense that she didn't really quite understand how deep they were at that point into integration, in terms of these gears already moving, how quickly it was going to move, not in the sense that we would see a lot of Black players come in, but in the sense that this is going to have, this is going to do irreparable harm to Black baseball pretty quickly. I don't think she understood that. I think she understood trouble was ahead. I don't think she knew how quickly it would overtake her.
In your book on Effa Manley, you write, she saw the Negro Leagues as a vehicle to transport the Black community to a position of equality in American society. Why do you think she saw baseball, of all things, as a vehicle for Black equality?
Yeah, I just think, well, first of all, sports, presented one of the first ways for Black people to be seen as respected. And I say that term loosely because, there was still always, this kind of this underlying sentiment that Black people are not equal, even if you are great at sports, even if you are Jack Johnson and, you are this incredible boxer, you're still Black, Jack Johnson. But sports still presents this first, vehicle, this first opportunity for Black people to kind of rise above this station, where they can prove their value without necessarily, needing, full validation from white people, right? If you're great at sports, you're just great at sports. Now, we can look at the integration of college football, for example. And, even when we get to the point where it is obvious that, Black people are great at playing college football, you still have holdouts. You still have white people who are white coaches who are like, yeah, I don't know if I want to, integrate or sign these guys, or, that kind of thing. But yeah, it is still a way for Black people to, I guess, not just prove their value, but to also make money. Okay. And again, because of just where baseball is on the whole, in terms of its growth as an industry, as a professional business, there was just a lot of opportunity there. It's hard, right? If I had said tomorrow, I want to get into baseball. I want to have a professional baseball team. And like, it's gonna be really hard, right? Because, professional baseball is firmly established now. But this was still early enough that, yeah. And again, the Negro Leagues were born out of the ugliness of segregation, but it still created this great opportunity in that you could start your own business, this really lucrative business, and not have to get the okay of white owners, of the white establishment. You could do that, and you could employ other people, and you could make great money, because again, this baseball is America's national pastime. So I think Effa understood all of that. I think she understood too that Black people needed an escape from reality, from the day-to-day of being Black in America and all that entailed. And baseball was an exciting venture because it was an escape. It provided this opportunity for people to come together, dressed up, to hang, to, not have to worry about where they can sit and where they can't sit and all of these things, and get to see people, having fun, playing this game, being really, really great at it, and then ultimately making money. And because, again, this is America's national pastime, it creates an elevated platform, just like sports now, right? Like, I can say something and it can mean something to the 3,000 Twitter followers I have, and then LeBron James can say something, and he has a larger reach, because that is how sports, that is the power of sports in our society. I think Effa understood that even then.
If she was still alive today, what do you think she would think of the political engagement we see from Black athletes today?
Yeah, I think she'd be very excited about it. I mean, again, Effa is a woman who said the things that needed to be said, even if they weren't the popular things. So I think she would be able to appreciate that. I think there was a lot of kind of, respectability politics going on. And there's still some now, of course. I don't know that we'll ever get away from that, but it bothered Effa, for instance, when Jackie Robinson takes to the pages of Ebony magazine and really tears apart Black baseball, and he's going in on how tough it is to be on these long road trips, and the fact that you can't eat at the restaurants and sleep at the hotels, and we don't really get to do spring training because we're playing all these games. Well, these are systemic issues that he ultimately has a problem with. The reason why teams aren't training as much as they are playing is because they need to make the money, because again, Black teams don't have the access to the capital, to the resources. They can't even charge as much for tickets as white teams can, because they understand that they are catering primarily to Black people who don't make as much money as white people do. All of these things are larger systemic issues that I don't think Jackie fully grasped at that point. But he was, for all intents and purposes, he was the great Black hope. And people listened to what he had to say. So I know for a fact that bothered her. She went on record and said that he was ungrateful and that he didn't understand what he was talking about, all these other things. So I think now to see so many players using their platform to not, just draw attention to and tear down the issues in Black America, which, if we know who Jackie was at the end of his life, he was 100% that guy, right? Like he made this complete transformation. And even, in his memoir published shortly before he died, says, this was the Branch Rickey show. I was just a bit part in it. I can see now that really the interest in courting the Black community was to get Black dollars. It's more, green is more important than Black to Branch Rickey, to the Dodgers, to Major League Baseball on the whole. He got all that later in life, but initially he used his platform to essentially tear down what Effa and her colleagues were trying to build. So now when we see Black athletes that are using their platform to lift up things that are happening in the Black community, or to draw attention to issues with the intent of fixing them, and not just to critique them, I think, yeah, she would absolutely be thrilled by that.
Integration, and in particular Jackie Robinson's presence in the major leagues in 1947, spelled the end for Negro League baseball, even if the end wasn't immediate. With all of that said, what were some of the lasting impacts of Negro League baseball, and why should baseball fans spend more time studying the Negro League?
I think obviously the lasting impact is, first of all, just, the contributions of Black players who we would not have seen had it not been for the Negro Leagues. Jackie Robinson only spent a year in the Negro Leagues, but without the Negro Leagues, do we get Jackie? Right? Like, if he had come out of UCLA and did not have an opportunity to play baseball professionally with the Kansas City Monarchs, is he still playing baseball? Is he still in a position where Branch Rickey can recruit him, can scout him, and then say, okay, yes, I want you to come spend a year in my minor league system and develop? I don't know that we get that. We don't get Hank Aaron without the Negro Leagues, because he had to stop there first. So all of these things, all of these great players are certainly a direct result, that kind of early wave are a direct result of the Negro League's existence. But for me, the thing that I try to impress upon people, which I think Effa was too, and Rube Foster was too, again, is this idea that Black people aren't just great athletes, right? So now we've gotten to this point where in late 2020, Major League Baseball says that they are elevating the status of the Negro Leagues to Major League status. And generally speaking, people see that on the player level, the individual player level regarding their statistics, right? So now we are talking about Josh Gibson and Babe Ruth in the same breath, more of an apples to apples comparison, as opposed to saying, well, Babe Ruth hit all these home runs in Major League Baseball. Josh Gibson was over here, though. He was playing Black baseball. Now they are side by side because Black baseball, these Black leagues, were on the same level as the major leagues. That's important. But it's also important that we understand that if these players, these teams, these leagues were major league status, that means the managers and executives were too. So here we are in 2021. We are still having this conversation about where are all the Black managers, where are all the Black executives? Well, we had them at one point. And again, if they were of major league status, then now Effa Manley didn't just win a Negro World Series in 1946. She won a World Series in 1946. Her World Series sits alongside of all the World Series that Branch Rickey has won as well. Now we have to reassess why we are so averse to bringing Black people into these front offices, why we don't have Black ownership of not just Major League Baseball teams, but of professional sports teams on the whole. I think that when we really take a hard look at what Black people were able to accomplish in the 20s, 30s, and 40s via Black baseball, we have to really reassess what we're doing and not doing now. Because if they could do that then, I closed my book like this, particularly speaking to children and trying to get kids to kind of shift their paradigm. I tell people I have 4 kids, they're all athletes, and I think it's great that my oldest son wants to be the first athlete to win a World Series, a Super Bowl, and an NBA championship. That's great. I want kids to also think about, okay, I want to own a professional baseball team. Yeah. I want my daughter to think it is possible to be the next Effa Manley. I want to do that. And I think that when we start to really look at the issues that we have in Major League Baseball and understand the historical precedents, okay? We're talking about where all the Black people are in the front offices. We have to go back to the moment when they were shut out, which is the moment that Jackie Robinson was brought in. The door cracked open for Black players and bolted shut completely for Black executives and owners. We have to talk about that. And we have to also talk about, again, how we move to rectify that in light of that information.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining with us today, Andrea. It's been fascinating just being able to sit here and listen to you. Can you remind our viewers the name of your book? And I do want to let them know that we do have it in the Northeast State Library as well.
Sure. It is Baseball's Leading Lady, Effa Manley, and the Rise and Fall of the Negro Leagues. It is written as upper middle grade. So it'll be shelved with books generally for kids ages 10 to 14, but it is a book for all ages. I say that this is my Disney treatment. It is 100% appropriate for kids, but adults will get into it too. You know, we watch the Disney movies and we're laughing at the jokes that are really kind of snuck in there just for the adults. So this is that. It is a kid's book, but absolutely adults can learn from it. You don't have to have any context. You don't have to know what a full count is. You can come to this with zero baseball knowledge, zero Negro Leagues knowledge, and I lay all of that out because this is a story that's bigger than baseball. Really, it is a perfect microcosm for society on the whole, how we've moved through race relations in this country, the missteps that we've made along the way. You can see all of that in this story about Effa Manley, the first woman inducted into Cooperstown, and the overall story of Black baseball.